Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the IQME Safety Centre members webinar. This is our first webinar for 2016. My name is Trish Kerin. I'm the Director of the IQME Safety Centre. With me today, I'm joined by John Bresland. John is a research fellow at the Mary Kay O'Connor Process Safety Centre at Texas A&M University. He's also President of Process Safety Risk Assessment in West Virginia, a process safety consultancy focusing on the chemical and energy sectors. From 2002 to 2012, John served as a board member on the United States Chemical Safety Board. While on the board, he served as chairman from 2008 until 2010. He worked for Honeywell International from 1966 to 2000. At Honeywell, he held various positions in process engineering, environmental compliance, and plant management. He's a member of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, the American Chemical Society, the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. He graduated in chemistry from Londonderry Technical College in Northern Ireland and from Salford University in England. As we progress through the webinar, you'll be able to ask questions or make comments by typing in the questions box on your screen. We'll endeavour to answer your questions at the conclusion of the presentation, so please do definitely put through any questions that you'd like us to talk about. So what I'd like to do now is bring John into the conversation. And John, I'd like to explore with you why you became so involved in process safety and how that led you to your role at the Chemical Safety Board.
Well, thank you, Trish, for that kind introduction, and welcome to all of the participants in the webinar this evening. I'm speaking from West Virginia, where it is 8 o'clock in the evening, and I understand that most of the participants are in Australia, where I think it's probably around either 12 noon or 1 o'clock, depending where you are. So the question that Chris asked me was, how did I get involved with process safety? And if you look at the slide on your screen, it's a slide of a chemical plant that I used to work in. It was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is about halfway between Washington and New York City. And in 1982, if I recall, it was the largest phenol plant in the world. I was out of the office that day, and I got a phone call telling me that the plant had exploded, and I didn't believe it because I just couldn't believe that something like that would happen. But I immediately jumped in the plane, returned to Philadelphia, and went to the plant. Got in there about midnight, and I saw this disastrous explosion that had taken place. And the thing that really amazed me about this was how a normal operating chemical plant, running well, running smoothly, could be turned into what I'd call a mass of spaghetti-like steel, literally in a fraction of a second. And when I saw that, I realized the importance of operating a plant as safely as possible, and certainly having a good and strong process safety program. And from there, this was back in '81. From there, I moved. I stayed with Honeywell, as Trish said, and eventually finished up in our headquarters in New Jersey. I retired from Honeywell in 2000, but still retained an interest in the whole issue of process safety, and I was asked to apply for a job at the Chemical Safety Board, which I did. And for those of you who are outside North America, the way this process works is you apply to the White House, you get background investigation by the FBI, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And I was confirmed and started my job in September of 2002. And that has been a very eye-opening experience for me, because I did see the impact on chemical plants and oil refineries of what can happen in an accident, and the impact on people and on the facilities. Some of the terrible tragedies that we got to investigate while over the 10 years that I was there. So I'll turn it back to Trish.
Okay, thanks for that, John. And I think that's really interesting around, having seen or been experiencing some of those major incidents firsthand as well. So I guess then your time at the Chemical Safety Board, while you were there, there was a series of fatal flash fires at the Haganese Corporation that was due to combustible dust. What for you are the key standouts from this particular series of incidents that occurred at that facility and its subsequent investigation by the CSB?
Well, if you look at the slide, you'll see that the CSB did investigate that series of incidents. And the thing that really shocked me about this was the lack of knowledge that the company appeared to have about the dangers of combustible metals. In this case, it was very finely divided metal powder that was either exploding or catching fire. And actually, in the 4-month period at the facility, in January there were 2 fatalities. In March there was 1 injury, and in May 27th there were additional 3 fatalities. Now, when I compare that to some of the good operations and the good facilities that I've been to, if they have 1 fatality in 10 years, it's a major issue for them, a major problem. So having 5 fatalities in the period of 4 months just was horrible to me. So I was really concerned about the lack of knowledge of the flammability and the explosibility of combustible metal dust. And one of the things I regret about this particular investigation is that this company was owned by GKN, which is a large British industrial company. And when I look back on it, I feel we should have continued our investigation looking into GKN's oversight of the facility and where they operating it. Why were they having so many accidents, and why wasn't somebody getting really upset about this and saying, this has to stop? So I do have a regret that we just didn't go right to the very top on this to find out what their safety culture was like.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective, especially given that the first fatalities they had happened in the January, and then there was the subsequent fatalities in the May. So there was, a 4-month period there where I guess there was an opportunity to learn from the first 2, but it took another 3 for further action to be taken by the organisation. Was there a reason that they didn't appear to be learning from the first incident in January?
That's a good question, and I just don't know why they didn't do it. I mean, one of the important things about combustible dust explosions is that you just clean up your operation, get rid of the dust that's flying around the facility, so that if you do have a dust explosion, which as most of your listeners would probably know, a serious dust explosion is usually twofold. You have the first small explosion, which fluffs up all of the dust that's flying around the plant, and then you have that dust that is fluffed up, it explodes, and that causes the really serious damage and the serious injuries to personnel. So they really should have learned their lesson, but unfortunately they didn't. Unfortunately for the people involved, they didn't.
Yeah, tragically for the next 3. Okay. So one of the other incidents that you then also were involved with was the Bayer Crop Science pesticide waste tank explosion. Again, what were the key standouts for you in this one?
Well, the issue here was they had been rebuilding part of the facility and they were starting back up again, and they had a tank that contained a particularly a reactive material. It was a waste tank. So, and I think in chemical plants, and certainly in my experience too, waste tanks don't seem to get quite the same amount of oversight that the regular process plants have. But in this case, without getting into the details, because you can read about it in the CSB's webpage, a more concentrated material got into the waste tank, and when it heated up, it decomposed, and the tank exploded. And the two operators who were standing close by were killed as a result of that. One interesting aspect of this was that Bayer Crop Science got involved with trying to slow down or prevent the investigation because of their interpretation of some new security regulations in the United States. And that got a lot of people upset that they were trying to do that, and it actually finished up with a hearing in front of one of the committees in U.S. Congress in Washington, at which the president of Bayer Crop Science and I were sitting up being questioned by the members of the committee, and it wasn't a really good day for the company, and they certainly got quite a lot of negative publicity as a result of number one, the accident, and number two, the fact that they had to appear in Congress. And one of the other issues with this one that you should keep in mind is that one of the chemicals used in this facility was methyl isocyanate, and you'll all recognize methyl isocyanate as being the chemical that caused the incident, the tragic incident in Bhopal with multiple thousands of fatalities. So in the community around this facility, there was a lot of concern about the fact that there was methyl isocyanate, or MIC. And one of the issues in the investigation was could the MIC tank have been exposed or impacted by the explosion? As it turns out, it wasn't, but that's a little hard to explain to people in the public that, well, it didn't happen, but it could have happened. That eventually the company got rid of the methyl isocyanate completely, because that was a major public relations problem for them.
Yes. Okay, John, can I get you to sort of have a consistent distance to your microphone? There's a couple of instances where you're just sort of breaking in and out a little bit for us.
Okay.
One of the things that in the past I've heard you speak a number of times, and you've talked about an experience in your career seeing three different types of companies. So could you take us through the different types of companies that you've seen?
Well, this is being pretty simplistic, but the first type of company that I see is one that just does not understand the hazards of their operations. They don't have good safety programs. They don't have good process safety programs, and as a result, they have serious incidents with serious consequences. So this type of company, usually, but not necessarily smaller companies, but they're dealing with hazardous materials, and as a result, they don't understand the hazards and the tragedy that can result from dealing with these materials. I've got a few photographs here. I think Trish will probably put them all up. Mm-hmm. The one on the left of the people in the ambulance is actually not, that's in China. And again, but that was a combustible dust explosion in China, where at last report, 146 people died in this combustible dust explosion, and it was in a facility that was making parts for a supplier to General Motors, the large car company. The second example is from Hagenese. That's the one on the top right. That's where the third incident took place. And if you get on the CSB's webpage, there's a very good video of that particular incident, the third one. And the one on the bottom is one I like to use as an example. I'm not using combustible dust here on purpose, but there have been some. When a combustible dust explosion occurs, it tends to be very, very serious. And this was a combustible dust explosion in the state of Georgia, in the southeast United States. But the combustible dust is one that probably would surprise you, that it was sugar dust. And the plant exploded, 14 people died. And interestingly enough, they just had received a new CEO, and that CEO was visiting the facility to introduce himself to the employees. When the explosion took place, he was, luckily enough, he wasn't injured, but he became a very serious advocate for the issue of the control of combustible dust.
Mm. Yeah, the sugar one's an interesting one. People often forget that, flour, milk powder, sugar, the things that we eat can actually still be combustible dust and cause quite significant devastation. Let's move on to the second type of company.
Yeah. Okay, the second type of company is probably the one that's best known to people in the audience. That company has, they understand the hazards and the regulations. They have really good safety programs, excellent safety programs. They've got quality people. But yet they still have incidents, some minor and some serious and some very serious. And what happens here, it just causes a lot of frustration for their management, because senior management feels that they've put good people in place. They've got people who are experts in the hazards, but yet still things happen. And I can, some examples of those companies would be DuPont or Chevron, Exxon, and BP. Although I'm not convinced that BP's process safety programs before they had the BP Texas City incident were necessarily as good as they should be. They were focusing much more on personal safety, people safety. So these companies are the good companies. They're the well-known companies. They've got good programs, but yet they're having these very significant accidents that are causing real problems with their management, and as a result of that, then they try to figure out what happened, and they usually double up on their process safety programs and make them even better, and hopefully the same thing will not happen again.
Okay. So what about this third type of company then?
Well, that's the type of company that I'd like to see. And these are the companies that they understand the hazards and the regulations. They have excellent safety programs, quality people, very similar to the second type. But they don't have any serious accidents. And that's the sort of company that I would like to see more of. But the question is, are there many of them around? You have a little. Is this a unicorn? Is
It's a unicorn. Yes, I thought it was appropriate for that third type of company from the perspective that do they exist? Because we do have to have that. Even if we have a history of not having a significant incident, you still need to be ever vigilant that it could happen.
Well, I'm willing to hear comments from the audience or other people who may see this presentation in the future to give me some examples of this type of company that has a really good program, but does not have serious incidents. Mm-hmm. So I would be very happy to hear what they are.
Okay. And if anyone has any ideas out there, then please do share them with us in the chat box. In terms of your rules for process safety success, then I'd like to go through some of those, because you've mentioned these before to me, where you've got some sort of set focus areas.
Well, obviously the rule number one, the big one is, excuse me. Rule number one is you really need leadership on process safety. And leadership, what I mean by leadership is leadership from the top all the way down through the organization. from the CEO to the shift supervisor, there has to be a real commitment to process safety. If the CEO isn't interested in it, then there certainly will be less interest at the plant level. If the CEO comes down for his tour of the plant and a presentation on how things are going, and he doesn't bring up the topic of process safety, and then that sends a message that is not a good message to the rest of the people in the facility.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think leadership also has to understand, and I'm sure most of them do in today's world, but they have to understand that a first-class process safety program has benefits in both production and financial benefits. Because if you have a really good program, a good process safety program, you're not having accidents, your plant is running smoothly, you're making the production, you're probably making it at a good level of productivity and a good level of profitability as well. So
yes.
there are certainly significant reasons for having a strong leadership on process safety.
Mm. Okay, let's move on to Rule 2 then.
Rule 2, the issue of mechanical integrity and equipment reliability go together, and pretty much what I was saying under Rule 1. And the benefits here are, again, if you have no incidents, either large or small incidents, you're going to have a more productive facility, you're going to have a safer facility, and you're going to have fewer injuries for your people. So this is not a simple thing to do, because chemical plants and oil refineries are complex operations, and mechanical integrity was the reason for a number of incidents that we investigated when I was at the Chemical Safety Board. I'm thinking of one at a refinery in the state of Washington, at Tesoro Refinery, where there was a serious mechanical integrity problem with a heat exchanger that exploded and killed a number of the operators who were standing beside it. So if you have a good mechanical integrity program and you're not getting leaks and spills, you're going to have reliability of your equipment, and that reliability of your equipment is going to lead to successful operations and profitable operations.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, on to Rule 3.
Well, Rule 3, the important thing in Rule 3 is to, what I'm saying is, you have to have the right people working for you. And I mean the right people. When I say the right people, I'm talking about everybody who works in your operation, from the plant manager all the way down to the operators and mechanics who are running the place on a day-to-day basis. You have to have a very strong hiring program, and then you continue to educate them as they continue with their career with your company. And I'm differentiating here between training and education. There is a difference there. Training tends to be more kind of, here's what you do. You go out to the plant, and this is the valve that you open. But education is more as to, here's why you do it, as well as what you're doing. And I think the why is giving people the reason that this is important, and for example, the use of personal protective equipment. I mean, people will say, well, why do I have to wear this? And it's very easy to explain to them that the why of wearing it is to protect you from hearing loss, eye loss, getting burned if you're working in an oil refinery. So it's certainly very important when you're doing your training that you teach people this is why you have to do it. This is the chemical involved. These are the hazards involved, as well as just saying just go out and do it and don't really pay too much attention to me. Now, one of my examples, or my favorite examples on training, is this photograph taken in Cambodia, as you can see, I think it was 2013, and the young caddy was part of a caddy corps at this golf course, and they would work at the golf course, but before they worked at the golf course, they were living, in the facility, in the vicinity, didn't know anything about golf, and they were working with people in their new job. They would have to work with people who certainly understood something about golf, but also they would be speaking in multiple languages. People from all over the world would be visiting this place, but they had this training academy for the caddies, and they bring them in and spend 6 months training them, and they turned out to be really terrific caddies. So I always like to use that as an example of the benefits of training and education.
I just thought you liked showing off your socks in that photo, John.
Well, I didn't want to say that. But she also learned how to say, "I think the ball went in the water," in English as well, even though she was Cambodian. That was a little disheartening.
You wish they hadn't have taught her that bit. Okay. All right, let's talk about Rule 4.
Okay. Again, the point I'm trying to make here is that in a chemical plant and an oil refinery, there are a lot of details involved in running it. The details can be around the materials of construction, the sophistication of the control system, a lot of just very significant details. And one little detail that doesn't work properly out of maybe 1 million in a typical chemical plant, or probably more than 1 million in an oil refinery, can really cause serious problems. Hopefully the plants are designed that one detail that fails would be backed up by another detail that's working, but you never know. A leak, because you're using a wrong material in construction, can very quickly go from a small leak to a fire, to a major fire, to a major public relations fiasco for you. Mm-hmm. So and I use an example here on the next slide of a plane just getting ready to take off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, back a few months ago in October of 2015, and they were taxiing onto the runway, and somebody noticed that fuel was leaking out of the left engine. So the control tower called over to the plane and said, "Look, you've got a serious fuel leak. People are seeing it." So the pilot said, "Okay, let's get back to the airport, or let's get back and we'll get it fixed." But within seconds, he got another call saying, "Your left engine's on fire." And at that point, they had to, as you can see, they had to run out. They had to evacuate the plane using the slides. But the interesting thing about this was what had happened here was that the main fuel supply line coupling assembly had disconnected between the wing and the engine strut. And so when you have a fuel supply line to a large engine like that, that's the detail of why was it not, what exactly caused that to happen. And that detail, which didn't work, caused the plane to catch on fire, caused the people to evacuate. And as a matter of fact, they were probably pretty lucky that they hadn't just taken off when this happened, because that would have been a major disaster for them. So details matter, and you really have to, on a day-to-day basis, take care of the details.
Absolutely.
So going on. Yeah.
Rule number 5.
Okay, pretty common one these days. Develop and report personal safety and process safety metrics. Back in the good old days, the most important metric that people were looking at was personal safety. How many first aid cases were there? How many, what we call in the United States, OSHA recordable cases? How many lost workday cases? And those are the ones that management focused on. The plant manager would be questioned about those. Whenever the senior executives would come to visit, the plant manager would make sure that his personal safety performance was really good. But in recent years, the issue of process safety metrics has become much more important and much more widespread. And facilities are now measuring and reporting leading and lagging indicators. Now, the lagging indicators are the ones of the incident that has happened, so they're pretty easy to keep a record of. The question is, what do you do about leading indicators? Because the leading indicators are the ones that you're looking at that could be, if they're going out of whack, they could be going in the direction of you having an incident. And some examples of leading indicators are your training records. Are they being kept up to date? Are people being trained appropriately? Are you following up to recommendations coming out of process hazard analysis? Even on a simpler basis, are you looking at your housekeeping? Because poor housekeeping can lead to it's an indication of maybe a sloppy operation, and there's that sloppy operation also in the process area as well. So it's certainly important that you develop and you work with both personal safety and process safety metrics.
So go on.
So moving on to the next one, number 6.
Yep.
This one's a little bit philosophical as opposed to being very specific. But what I mean is you have a choice when you're operating a chemical plant. You have a choice when somebody comes to you and says, we have a problem here, we need to shut down and fix it. And the choice is, so you're the deciding person, you might be the plant manager or the operations manager. You have a choice that when you look at it, you say, well, we can shut down and fix it, and we're going to lose some production by doing that. My boss is going to be unhappy. The second part of the choice is you can keep going, keep running, and wait until the next turnaround comes around, and you hope that whatever that problem is will not show up and not cause you a serious incident. But my recommendation is, and this is not simple. It's not black and white. There's certainly a large gray area here. But my recommendation is you look at the long term, because if you did not shut down and you had this incident, then you're going to have to live with the issue of damage and injuries, negative publicity, and you're going to have to remember that probably for the rest of your life. Just as the way I remember what happened back in 1981 with the explosion at the plant that I was working at. So if you shut down and fix it, you have this short-term loss, but you do have the long-term gain, and you avoid especially the negative publicity that goes with something like this, and the possible significant impact on the employees, either with injuries or with hopefully not with fatalities. So take the long-term view, think about it. Don't just jump in and say, oh, we'll wait until we'll wait until the next turnaround. That'll be a few months away, and it'll be okay. Don't worry about it. It's not the right attitude to take.
I think now also in terms of how widespread social media is, as well as just the general media. We're now seeing even more impact on companies through the reputational damage as well. So aside from the human and the asset cost that goes with it, there's certainly a lot of reputational cost that really should be driving people to take the long view on risk, I think.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. I'm not a Twitter person, but I see in the United States here the use of Twitter in the elections, and it doesn't. It's a tool that local communities can use and spread either good information about your facility or poor information about your facility.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go on to Rule 7.
Okay, pretty straightforward, this one. You really have to be prepared for that worst case emergency, and you have to practice your emergency drills. And I'm thinking of just thinking back to the incident that I described in Philadelphia with my phenol plant. We had that very serious explosion. The emergency response was pretty good. The city of Philadelphia has got a very excellent fire department, and they responded. But we decided to, there was an issue here with evacuation of people in the community. And they were very concerned after the explosion that they could be kind of locked in just because of the locality of the facility between the Delaware River and one of the major north-south U.S. highways. So we decided we would have after the incident, a few months, we would have an emergency drill, a serious emergency drill in which we would actually evacuate people in the community. And I was out there in the community, and we'd arranged for buses to come and take people to a safe location during this drill. And we sounded the sirens. We had the call down phones working, and the TV people were there. And I was standing there watching all of this take place out in the community, and the TV lady came up to me and she said, What's the problem with the buses? All of the buses are over there, and she pointed off to her right. And all of the people are over there, and she pointed off to her left. And unfortunately, the people in the buses were separated by several hundred yards. And I kind of stuttered trying to figure out, well, how do I respond to someone like this? Because obviously there was a mix-up in the communications. And she let me off the hook. She said, well, I guess that's why we run emergency drills. And it's a very good question. Mm-hmm. Practicing drills is another example of that is if you look at the very first slide, that was a slide taken of the facility in Texas, in the little town of West Texas, that exploded because of an ammonium nitrate explosion and killed 12 or 13 firefighters. That explosion caused significant damage to a nursing home, a school, an apartment building, all off-site. And I'm sure that they weren't aware of the potential hazards of that facility. And if this explosion had actually happened during the day, it could have had a serious impact on the people in the school, and also people in their apartment buildings and people in the nursing home. Mm. So again, that emergency drill, one thing important about it, in my experience, is get to know your emergency responders, get to know your outside emergency responders. A lot of refineries have their own internal firefighting operation, and they're very well trained. Mm-hmm. But in a serious incident, you are going to have to call for help from the outside.
Yep.
So it's really important that you know on a kind of a first-name basis the people who will be coming in from the outside to help you when you have this serious incident.
Okay. So speaking of incidents, that takes us on to rule number 8.
Yeah, and this is what you need to do. And when I'm talking about an incident here, I'm not talking about something that would be getting into the newspapers or very serious. It's just the the unfortunate run-of-the-mill incidents where you might have a leak or a spill, maybe a small fire, and you also have near misses where something could have happened, but it came very close to happening. So you need to investigate those incidents and then follow up with recommendations and follow up on the recommendations and make sure that the recommendations are being implemented. There's, again, this slide is pretty straightforward, but the complications around an investigation can be much more difficult. So you need to really have a good group of people who are doing the investigation of incidents. I just show this little photograph of a near miss and an incident. Obviously, this was I think the second landing of the year at the North Pole, and it's a Russian plane that was landing. Obviously, something happened here. I'm not sure what it was, but it's kind of an embarrassing photograph. So I'm sure there'll be a very serious investigation done of this incident.
Yeah, certainly looks like a weight distribution problem of some sort there. Okay, on to number 9.
So
you there, John? Can you hear me? We seem to have lost John temporarily. We'll just see if we can get him back. I'm still waiting for him to come back. Okay, let's see if I can actually get hold of him in some other way. Whilst we're waiting for him to come back, I might, I guess, just give you some of my thoughts on his rule number 9. And this is one thing that I mentioned earlier around it really is important, and perhaps that third type of company is a challenge, because there does need to be that sense of vulnerability, and in particular looking at always being focused on when the next incident is going to happen and what can actually go wrong. And I think that's a really important aspect around this. It's often talked about as being mindful leadership, that idea of avoiding becoming complacent, constantly looking for the issues around what can go wrong. There's a lot of focus now within organisations around particularly making sure that we understand when we have success, and that's an important thing, I think, to understand and focus on the successes and acknowledge the successes. But that needs to be balanced off with this idea that if you only focus on the success, you potentially will become complacent at that point. So I have heard back from John, and he's attempting to reconnect with us. I might actually keep moving through as we wait for him to come back, and hopefully he'll be able to come back and join us for the questions. He only had one more rule to then cover, his rule number 10, and that was around a strong process safety culture. And I think this strong process safety culture also very much ties in with rule number 1, which was about leadership, because the safety culture of an organisation, or in fact the culture of an organisation, is really created and driven by what leadership accepts and tolerates in their organisations. So I think that these two rules link very closely together. Is it you, John?
I'm back on again, yeah.
Okay. I covered off on your rule number 10, and I do hope I did it justice in terms of the sense of vulnerability and not being complacent. And I was just discussing process safety culture and how that really ties in quite well with rule number 1 around the leadership aspect as well, because culture and leadership are very closely tied together. So did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think process safety culture is something that really works all the way from the top to the bottom. And a little bit like the question that you should ask yourself, what do you do when no one's looking? Do you do the right thing? You're hiring the best people. You've got excellent training. You've got knowledgeable operators, mechanics, and you have a lot of expertise on process safety. And I don't. When I say you've expertise in process safety, I don't mean that you know the rules and regulations. You actually know the technology that's behind that's really part of the whole operation. So I always felt that I could walk into a plant and tell pretty quickly what their safety culture was like, both the process safety and on their personnel safety. So it's a sort of a sixth sense that you develop over the years when you visit an operation.
Yes. Okay, we've actually now had some questions come in from the audience, so I might start off with the first question that came in. So this one is, I'd be interested to hear from John comments on the failure to learn, and the examples given here are BP Texas City as well as the Esso Longford in Victoria, because Professor Andrew Hopkins has spoken on the topic of failure to learn and cites it as a significant factor. So do you have any comments around that failure to learn issue, John?
Well, I think the comment I would have is that when you have an incident and it's investigated and you know what happened, so you've got a good idea. I think that things will run pretty well for 5 or 10 years, and then there's a turnover of the staff, a turnover of the people. You're hiring, you're bringing in new people, older people are retiring, and a lot of that expertise, as people leave, is disappearing with those people. So there isn't that institutional memory there of what happened, unless the institutional memory. And I was talking to a friend this morning who works in a chemical plant that had an incident maybe 20 years ago, and he was saying in the operation, the people who were involved with that incident remember it very, very clearly. And this is right now this would be a small group of people, maybe 4 or 5. The rest of the facility does not really know very much about what happened. So there's a failure of that memory. So you need to figure out a way to pass on that information over the generations of the people who work in the plant, so that they understand what it is. Now, the failure to learn in a large corporation could be an incident in one facility in North America, and they've other facilities in Europe or Asia, and that information isn't passed over properly, isn't passed over well from one facility to another. There should be a way for those lessons learned to get spread out all over the corporation, and that could be done with a good communications program at the corporate level that is passing on information about incidents that are happening. And I think that's in the large companies now, with the very sophisticated communications that they have, that has been done very well.
Okay. The next question I've got is, have other countries adopted a CSB-like approach to improve their nation's process safety management performance? And if not, do you have any thoughts on why not?
Well, probably some people in the audience might contradict me, but the only country that I know that is going in somewhat of a similar way. Well, in the UK, they have the Health and Safety Executive, and I know that they do investigations. In Holland and in the Netherlands, they have the Dutch Safety Board, and they do investigations, but their safety board is investigating incidents across the board, all the way from the downing of the Malaysian Airlines plane that had taken off, and which apparently was shot down, all the way from that to incidents in hospitals, to incidents in chemical plants and oil refineries.
Yeah.
But why have they not done it? I think it's a very, very useful tool, and the disappointment I've always had with the Chemical Safety Board is that we never really have enough resources to do as many incidents as we'd like to do. Every day we'd be getting reports on incidents, and it was a difficult matter to pick out the really serious ones that required an investigation. Mm-hmm. We certainly could have done with significantly more funding than the $11 million that we were getting every year. Why do other countries not do it? I think they should. I really do. Somebody suggested that you could have a sort of a European Union, for example, safety board, but apparently there would be some political issues around that as to, especially when it comes to assigning responsibility for the causes of the incident. Some people may not be all that happy if somebody from Spain was coming in and telling somebody from France, this is how you need to do your job.
Yeah, I think.
I definitely, I don't. Do they have anything like this in Australia?
No, the way that it's generally conducted in Australia is a little bit similar to the UK. A parliamentary inquiry or a royal commission will be established for the specific incident that's to be investigated. Because even the HSE in the UK, they investigate with a view to prosecute. Whereas obviously one of the key aspects of the CSB is that it's not there to prosecute, it's there to find the root cause. Often what we see with the royal commissions that we conduct in Australia, the focus is around understanding what occurred and why it occurred, more so than prosecuting perspective, though at the end of the day it does look for blame, which can be an issue in itself as well. Got another question here. Sorry, go on.
Okay. Well, I was going to say about the Royal Commissions. My experience with the UK are just at least following up what happens in the UK is that the Royal Commissions tend to are really set to investigate the very, very serious incidents like Piper Alpha or incidents like that, and they do excellent work. But their reports are very, very detailed and very, very, very complex and well put together, and probably very, very expensive to finalize over the years that it takes to come up with the results.
Yes. Yeah, and that's certainly one of the challenges. And we only, within Australia, the Royal Commission only gets triggered for very, very significant incidents as well. Got another question here. This comes back to your three types of company and company 3, and the question of why were there no examples? Is it too difficult because operational designs are too complex?
Well, why were there no examples of companies that are not having incidents?
Is it about complexity?
Well, I couldn't think of any.
Okay, but do you think
because of the complexity?
Yeah, because of the complexity.
Because of the complexity of today's operations.
Yes. Is that complexity leading to incidents potentially?
Yeah. If you look at the airline industry, for example, they've got a very good safety record. In that it's rare to have a very serious airline incident with multiple fatalities, but yet on a day-to-day basis they are having smaller incidents like bird strikes or engine failures, and you can read a bit about this on there are web pages that report on sort of day-to-day incidents in the airline industry. And it's a very complex business, but yet they are not having the really serious incidents. And certainly the major European, Asian, Australian, American airline companies they're not having serious incidents on a regular basis. And when they do, it becomes a huge public relations deal for the company.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't think the excuse can be they're too complex. I think the complexity needs to be managed.
Yep. Okay. There's one last. I'm actually going to wrap these last two questions up into one question because it's around process safety lead metrics. So you mentioned those in one of your rules, and the Safety Centre itself has done some work in defining some lead metrics. So the first part of the question is do you have a particular favourite lead process safety metric? And the follow-up part to that is, do you have some more examples of some leading or lagging process safety metrics?
Well, probably my favorite one would be companies are required to do process hazard analysis, and each process hazard analysis will come up with recommendations as to what should be done to deal with a particular issue that comes up in the process hazard analysis. You need to be following up on those recommendations. So a good leading indicator there would be how many of those are you following up on, and are you as you follow up on them, are you making improvements and taking care, making sure that the recommendations are complied with.
Yeah.
Other examples, as I recall, CCPS has written a book on leading and lagging indicators. Am I correct with that?
They did.
Trish?
Back in 2007, they released a document on process safety indicators that covered both lead and lag metrics. The lead part was more as with, and that then went on pretty much to become API 754 standard on process safety metrics. But both of those documents don't really clearly define any lead process safety metrics. So as a result of that, last year in the Safety Centre we published some guidance on lead process safety metrics for that very purpose, to really try and show what some examples of lead metrics are, so that people can report what they need to report against to understand it. And if we can get people reporting consistently, then we can start to benchmark them. So there is definitely some guidance out there on metric reporting.
You should pass out that information to the audience and let them let them understand where they can get that information.
Yes, I'm putting a link up for that.
And also with CCPS. And I think the question about giving examples, the examples tend to be process specific. So there are some general ones, like the one I gave, or one on is training being done appropriately, are the operating procedures being written accurately. But again, it really depends on the sort of facility you have, and what you have to look at your operation and decide what's the most important thing that I should be measuring and I would like to be measuring, and then start measuring it.
Yes, and then what we suggest is that if we can have people measuring consistently, then we can start to get to that point. Because, for example, most organisations are going to be measuring something around maintenance performed to schedule, for example. So if we can actually then tap into maintenance performed to schedule and say, okay, well, we need to, if we all report and track that in a similar way, then we can get some benchmarking come out from that.
Yes, yeah. And again, it would be interesting, and I think the industry has typically resisted this, but both the American Petroleum Institute and the American Chemistry Council are moving in the direction of publicizing indicators, both leading and lagging, and that would be a basis for comparing companies and comparing facilities. So I think there are going to be some interesting statistics to look at over the next few years.
Yep. Yes. All right. Well, that concludes the technical part of our webinar for today. Thank you very much, John, for participating in that. We've got another 3 webinars.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We've got another 3 webinars that will be coming up in May, July and October this year. If anyone has any suggestions about particular topics or anyone I'd like to hear from, if you could let me know at safetycentre@icme.org, and we'll look to try and plan those webinars for what you're after. In terms of other activities coming up in the Safety Centre, we've got various different projects that are occurring at the moment, doing some more work on lead process safety metrics, some more work on competency. We've got our case study learning activities, which will be launching in May. Some work on undergraduate process safety education, as well as education in process safety for OHS professionals, and a collaborative project between Merricarricona Process Safety Centre and the IQME Safety Centre on what the future of process safety looks like. You can also see there are a number of events that we've got coming up over the next till the end of the year in various places around the world. We've got hazards in Singapore, hazards in Edinburgh. In Adelaide in Australia, we'll have the Chemica conference where we'll be doing some work with the undergraduate education process. The Regional Process Safety Seminar in Asia will be in Bangkok this year. Then we've got the Merricarricona Process Safety Symposium and Association with IQME in Texas in October. And then lastly, to wrap the year out, we have Hazards Australasia in my hometown, Melbourne, at the end of the year in November. So thank you all very much for your participation today. We hope that you found this webinar interesting and thought-provoking. I'd certainly like to thank John Bresland for his time and contribution to this webinar. I'm sure you'll agree with me that his insights from his time at the CSB and the learnings there have been invaluable, and we've been very fortunate to have him share those with us today. The recording of this webinar will be stored on the IQME Safety Centre website for future use. Thank you to everyone who participated, and stay safe.